Stop crying.
Stop with the tears.
Don't cry.
Pick yourself up.
Stop with the emotion.
Don't be a pussy.
Don't let nobody disrespect you.
Be cool and be kind of a dick.
Always keep your mouth
Nobody
shut.
likes a tattletale.
Bros come before hoes.
Don't let your woman run your life.
You admit.
What a fag.
Get laid. Do something.
Be a man.
Be a man.
Grow some balls.
I really don't remember much from my childhood, but one memory I have will forever be etched into my soul. I was 9 years old and I saw a man I was really close to sitting outside in the sunshine, gently stroking our cat. I don't think he knew I was watching him because there was something incredibly intimate about that moment. He just seemed so alive, so peaceful, and so connected to the simple joys of life. And yet, just moments later, he walked into a room he would never walk out of again. The stark contrast between that loving, tender moment I witnessed and the violent finality of his death was and still is almost impossible to comprehend. Nor could I understand how someone who seemed to have it all, money, status, success, who embodied all the gender roles he was supposed to adhere to, living in a patriarchal world that conferred him with power and privilege, could be driven to such a tragic end. And I could never quite put my finger on why, even though at that age, as a survivor of CSA, I already bore the scars of patriarchal violence. I always had this instinctual sense that I was so glad not to have been born a boy. Now that I'm 28, the same age he was the day he died, I'm finding myself grappling with a lot of these same questions. When I think about those fleeting moments of tenderness with the cat, followed by that violent end, I'm always thinking, what is this complex inner world that is hidden beneath the surface of men? How is it that if women are the ones that are supposed to be oppressed, being a woman can still feel preferable to being a man? And in a society that tells us men have all the power and privilege, how might his death speak to a deeper, more painful truth? Watching the love with which he stroked the cat, I got to see a side of him I hadn't seen much before, a side that was deeply emotional, connected, and longing for quiet affection. I felt like I got a little glimpse into this inner world many men carry within them, a world that patriarchy pressurizes men to suppress. In How Can I Get Through to You, family therapist Terence Real calls this early indoctrination into patriarchal ways of being
the normal traumatization of boys. When I first began looking at gender issues, I believed that violence was a byproduct of boyhood socialization. But after listening more closely to men and their families, I've come to believe that violence is boyhood socialization.
The way we turn boys into men is through injury and violence. We force them to kill off the emotional parts of themselves. We pressurize them to follow a strict gendered blueprint for the living of their lives. We teach them to hide their true selves and wear a false mask of manhood.
The three most destructive words that every man receives when he's a boy is when he's told to be a man.
We've constructed an idea of masculinity that doesn't give young boys a way to feel secure in their masculinity, so we make them go prove it all the time.
Within their peer group culture, each of them is posturing based on how the other boys are posturing, and what they end up missing is what they each really want, which is just that closeness.
Our kids get up every morning, they have to prepare their mask for how they're gonna walk to school. A lot of our students don't know how to take the mask off.
But no matter how hard they try, most men are never going to live up to these impossible expectations.
Trying to fit into this narrow ideal of what it is to be a man in order to realize the patriarchal ideal, boys learn self-betrayal early and are rewarded for these acts of soul murder. By learning the arts of compartmentalization, dissimulation, and dissociation, so they are always living a lie, always wearing a mask. This falseness causes males to experience intense emotional pain.
Teaching men to suppress their true essence inherently destroys their internal guidance system. the part that tells them who they truly are, their interests, longings, passions. Without that self-intimacy, self-awareness, and inner compass to guide their lives, many men will only ever be a shadow of the person they could be. My younger brother used to be so full of the curiosities and possibilities of life. We used to sit up for hours talking about anthropology, sociology, psychology. But he got the message young that real men don't talk about these kinds of things. They're tough and strong and do physical work. Now he's been funneled into a career as a car mechanic, and it's hard to have a meaningful conversation with him. And although he's happy as Larry, I can't help but feel there's this whole internal world that lies dormant within him. And yet to be a man, at least a white man, is to be told a million different ways that the world is your oyster, that you can be and do anything you want in this lifetime. Marginalized groups rarely have the luxury of believing this mythology, but to be privileged sometimes costs us the clarity of vision needed to see through the bullshit. This means men are much more susceptible to what the philosopher Karl Marx called
false consciousness
on the part of working people, where they dedicate all their time towards manhood ideals of breadwinning, work, success, even though capitalism, wealth inequality, and economic crises ensures that 99% of men will never achieve the ideals they're taught to aspire to. So when men's achievements fall short of their expectations and aspirations in a world that tells you all your inadequacies are your own fault, it can lead to a profound sense of having failed at being a man. To this day, the biggest fight me and my partner have is about how much he works. As a taxi driver, he starts at 4 a.m. and finishes at 4 p.m. 6 days per week. And I'm always saying, is the sacrifice to your health, relationships, and friendships really worth it? But his identity as a man is so connected to work, it's hard to convince him otherwise. Yes, it sucks that the human qualities associated with being a woman are devalued, like motherhood, emotionality, and relational skills. But at least they generally promise more fulfillment and are more achievable than men's roles. It's no wonder so many men wake up at 50 with a midlife crisis, because they realize they've sacrificed this one precious gift of life on things that are unachievable, unfulfilling, and that pull them from things that truly matter in life, like being present and connected fathers, friends, and partners. All of this can cause immense emotional pain, but if we can't heal what we can't feel, we doom men to be perpetually emotionally frozen in time.
If you never cry, then you have all these feelings stuffed up inside of you, and then you can't get them out.
One of the lies of patriarchy is that it makes men independent and strong, when really they are so emotionally fragile. Many men find themselves absolutely destroyed by even relatively manageable events like a job loss or breakup, because they haven't been given the tools to deal with their feelings, nor do they have the emotional support network necessary to help them heal. And without safe avenues for emotional expression, many men's pain becomes transformed into rage or violence.
Boys are more likely to act out, they're more likely to become aggressive. Most people miss that as depression, or see it as a conduct disorder, or just a bad kid.
And the impacts are not only emotional and relational, but also physical too. Men live shorter, more dangerous, and less healthy lives than women. Many men would rather place themselves at risk, either physically or emotionally, than acknowledge distress or weakness. I still remember when my dad had a stroke a few years ago. He was at the beach with my mum, and he was stoically pretending everything was fine, nothing was happening. He could literally have died out of fear of weakness and vulnerability. The World Health Organization also found men endure greater exposure to physical and chemical hazards. And as I've been alluding to, the emotional pain of men leads to huge amounts of deaths of despair, either from overdose, substance abuse, or It's no wonder that in her book, The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity and Love, feminist writer Bell Hooks describes patriarchy
as the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit.
To love and be loved, whether romantically or otherwise, is one of the most beautiful parts of this human existence. I feel this sentiment so strongly when I think about the expression on the man's face looking at the cat, the beauty of the affection and the yearning for deep connection that was there beneath the surface. Yet patriarchy teaches men to construct a personal suit of armor and emotional distance from others, removing them from any relationships of real substance. To paraphrase the writer C.S. Lewis,
"You can harden yourself so nothing can hurt you, but the byproduct is nothing can reach you either."
From what I knew about this man before his death, his only friendships consisted of getting absolutely hammered every weekend. In general, friendships between men outside of alcohol, sports, competition and performance are virtually non-existent. As the musician Jens Lekman describes,
"We could talk about anything, as long as it was nothing."
The breadwinner expectation, alongside men's emotional constipation, means most men don't enjoy the type of intense family connections they are capable of, failing to have strong bonds with their kids. To this day, it's difficult for my dad to even give me something as basic as a hug outside of the most pathetic little pat on the back. And my granddad, who spent all his life working so hard as a lorry driver, spending so much time away from his family, now he's a depressed alcoholic. And this very same superficiality is also present in men's relationships with their partners. In A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf writes that women often serve as
looking glasses, processing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size.
In other words, men are encouraged to relate to women in terms of instrumental value, what we can do to enhance his self-image. So men frequently choose partners not on the basis of a depth of connection, but on how a weaker, more attractive, or less intelligent woman may bolster his manhood or status amongst other men. This need to appear larger than life also means men frequently feel they have to be the center of attention at all times in order to feel worthy as a human being. Sometimes when I'm in a room full of women and a man is taking up all the space, I often think to myself, you don't know what you're missing out on. The fascinating conversations, perspectives, and depth of intimacy that comes when people relate to you purely from the heart. If only you could just listen and see us as equals. All this emptiness, disconnection, and meaninglessness means men frequently expect women to make them feel whole again. All, of course, without requiring him to face the very things about himself and the patriarchy that are at the root of the problem in the first place. When women fail to live up to this impossible expectation, men frequently resent and blame women for not loving or supporting them enough. Even if women are able to give men what they want, rather than gratitude, the patriarchal expectation that real men are autonomous and independent sets men up to hate women for needing them. But there's only so long that a man's emotional armor can stay intact, and at some point, usually in the comfort of a friendship or relationship with a woman, the dam will break and a flood of emotions will pour out of men. However, speaking from experience, it's really exhausting to constantly be the emotional dumping ground for men. So often we can't deal with these friendships and relationships and end up rejecting these men who then feel abandoned by the very people they opened up to. Even if we do stick around, I've often had the experience of when breaking down the walls a man has built and seeing the wounded boy beneath the patriarchal mask, I suddenly become the target of his violence. It's like they're mad that someone has access to the part of themselves they tried so hard to keep under lock and key. They feel vulnerable, weak, and exposed, and so they try desperately to regain control via lashing out, rejecting us, pushing us away. It's too much to bear to open this Pandora's box, so many men end up hurting the ones that made them feel the most. Men may retreat to the comfort and safety of a more superficial, disconnected relationship, one where their mask can remain firmly intact. But somewhere deep down inside, they must have a profound sense of emptiness. I can't imagine how it must be when someone tells you that they love you, but you know they don't really love the real you. They love the mask you are wearing, the role you are playing, the performance you are putting on. You're not really seen, heard, or loved on any real, tangible level. So heterosexual intimacy is so often doomed because patriarchy is set up in such a way that makes relationships of true substance and healthy relating almost impossible. I think there's so much truth to the words of poet John Greenleaf Whittier.
Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these. It might have been.
How many men are out there living with deep regret about all the missed opportunities and unrealized potential, not being able to love someone out of fear, leaving words unspoken because they couldn't communicate from the heart, only ever having relationships of superficiality rather than substance, having hurt the ones they loved the most. Having spent a whole lifetime in avoidance of deep connection, communion with our fellow beings, vulnerability, emotionality, love, what kind of life is that? From the bits and pieces of information I've collected about this man since his death, I got the impression that he was often the butt of the joke, if not outright bullied, for his inability to live up to manhood expectations to get laid. There's even speculation that he died a virgin. Of course, I'm never going to know how true this is, or if so, how much this contributed to his early death. But I think it's safe to say that it certainly didn't help that when it comes to sex, patriarchy has created separate, unequal, heterosexual roles for men and women. Men are supposed to be always in control, dominant, assertive, voyeuristic sex machines. Women are passive, subordinate objects to be viewed. Huge importance is placed on the size of a man's penis, and he's always supposed to be rock hard and have long sustained erections. Men are taught to relate to their bodies not with connection, compassion, or pleasure, but as a machine that needs to perform optimally and prove its manhood. When me and my boyfriend lost our virginity at 18 years old, I still remember the first thing he said afterwards was, "I feel like a real man now." Good sex is defined by its capacity to enhance a man's masculinity. So many men start performing not what actually feels good, but what they think makes them manly, like thrusting and dominating willy-nilly. The anti-aging industry preys on men's size and performance anxieties by promoting so-called masculinity pills and penis-pumping surgeries to get their power tools running, equating restoring erections with restoring manhood. These impossible standards means size and performance anxieties constantly flood men's psyches. It seems to me there's a silent body dysmorphia epidemic going on. Men I've been with average or even above average sized penises are out here racked with insecurities, and they get the message so young. I still remember my younger brother at 5 years old asking me why his penis wasn't the size of our dad's. And whilst there's a lot of conversations about rejecting toxic beauty norms these days, rarely have the virtually unattainable manhood ideals to be tall, muscular, and have a perfectly sculpted penis been included in the conversation, nor do men openly discuss how these expectations have affected them. And it's not that it's all in men's heads either. We all inevitably absorb the societal messaging, leading us to reject men who don't meet these arbitrary standards. I still remember in school, my friends and I ranking in order who we felt had the smallest to largest penis in our friend group. Luckily, we've all since realized and discussed just how fucked up that was. But who knows what kind of insecurities we contributed to. And these kinds of insecurities lead to a lot of defense mechanism behaviors amongst men. They may avoid any intimacy with women at all to ward off anyone witnessing their shame. They may only date skinnier or smaller women who they assume will have smaller vaginas, or exclusively have fleeting hookups to never stick around long enough to have their insecurities confirmed. Most men learn about sex from porn, so they start to internalize the values of porn as things to desire and aspire to in their own sex lives. Voyeurism, detachment, objectification becomes their habituated sexuality. Algorithms that send us ever more extreme images can lead to a lot of dissatisfaction and desensitization with sex with real human beings. A lot of men have sex with the illusion of forging a connection, like connecting a hose to a tap, but they aren't really there with us. It's more like they're masturbating with our bodies. Something I also noticed with my partner is that there's a compulsion for a man to feel like he always has to be down to fuck, and if he's not down to fuck, he's not a man. As the writer John Stolenberg put it in Refusing to Be a Man,
it's as if men don't really feel their male identity unless they're experiencing their own body in a way that is explicitly, culturally, sexually phallic.
This means men feel pressure to constantly masturbate, to sow their wild oats, and have sex even when they don't really want it, which creates an environment for violence against men to be minimized and trivialized. Boys who are targeted by babysitters or teachers are praised rather than being seen as victims of abuse. Many movies portray assault against men as something amusing or light-hearted.
Don't drop the soap, big homie.
My dad told me that when he told his mum about a pedo sports teacher that used to come into his changing room when he was getting changed, his mum just said, "Oh, what a dirty devil," and that was that. So basically, the safety and well-being of men and boys is taken less seriously. In fact, violence against men is often seen as a rite of passage into manhood. And whilst it's more normalised these days for women to discuss unsatisfying or harmful sexual experiences, men still aren't having these conversations because they internalise it as a personal failing. There's also a common compulsion amongst men to avoid avenues of potential pleasure that may place their masculinity into question. For example, men avoid anything that may be perceived as remotely homoerotic, like anal play or attraction to other men. They may avoid expressing needs, boundaries, and desires because to do so is seen as weak and pathetic. And from all that we know, a penis could experience sensations in the same way as a clitoris if it were not supposed to be used as a weapon of destruction. I could go on, but the core of what I'm getting at is that a type of sexuality based on authenticity, reciprocity, and bodily integrity is very different from the type of sexuality driven by a desire to actualize manhood. We're all talking about how men are so sexually liberated, so sexually free, but it doesn't seem to me like men are really out here having a good time. I'm a feminist, but I also think many iterations of feminism are failing men. I cringe now when I think about how many people, especially women, would tell this man before his death how lucky he was, how he had it all, good looks, charisma, a good job. Men are out here in pain and we keep telling them they're powerful and privileged. When he'd give hints at alluding to his suffering, he'd immediately be shut down. In the same way, feminists often say to men, "How dare you complain? You're the oppressor. We're not giving you empathy. Stop taking up space." We tell them to take responsibility for their actions, but if they do, they're publicly ousted, cancelled, and dragged. We say toxic masculinity and patriarchy are bad, but mainstream feminism has become synonymous with becoming more like a man, be a girl boss, a powerful patriarch. So instead of acknowledging the struggles of men, we reinforce that masculinity is something to aspire to. And feminists can be just as wedded to the patriarchy as men. My partner said to me that it seems the more loving he is, the less interested I am. The colder he is, the more I want him. And I think it's so true. It's almost as if a more feminist man subconsciously gives me the ick. And sometimes the expectations we have of men are so full of contradictions, they're hard to realize. In the past, I've told partners I want them to be dominant, but also practice equality, to hold the door open for me, but not be chauvinistic, to be tough and strong, but soft and gentle too. And perhaps most problematic of all, feminism, especially white feminism, has historically lacked intersectionality. Even this discussion today is lacking the nuance of discussing how manhood differs based on your race, class, or sexuality, for example.
The analysis and difference between rich and poor white men, able-bodied and disabled white men, neurotypical and atypical men, or even just good-looking and not good-looking. We haven't went there enough. We've left that entire portion of this discourse, of this analysis, I'll say, under-leveled.
So feminism is supposed to be a politic of love, compassion, and liberation, but often responds to men through hatred or apathy.
But can you imagine what it's like to be failing, have no prospects, and be told you're privileged? To be told that, like, how awful it feels to go, like, nothing is holding me back and I suck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To fail.
There's an open lane in front of me.
And I'm still failing. You know, that's tough. You know?
Very interesting.
And people would say boo-hoo.
Yeah.
You know, and I go, fuck you, boo-hoo. Your movement is love. How dare you then turn to the other side and go, boo-hoo, the white guy's failing. You know, the kid might be suicidal. The kid's fucking depressed because, you know,
right.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You gotta go all in on this love stuff, you know?
When men are demoralized and adrift and don't find a loving embrace in feminism, they can easily be manipulated and preyed upon by the right-wing manosphere, terrorist groups, and violent extremists, because at least they validate their sense of victimhood.
Do you have any idea how hard it is to actually be? Let me make this clear.
Go on, sir.
Do you have any idea how hard it is to actually be, no bullshit, a man?
The manosphere makes men feel that they are needed, that they matter, highlighting positive strengths of masculinity like leadership, strength, and protectiveness, making masculinity out to be something honorable and desirable.
And the masculine sentiments that used to be around, that people used to respect and admire, now they talk shit about. Oh, you're toxically masculine, toxic masculinity. Oh, alpha male, blah, blah, blah. When did that become a bad thing?
When you can't prove you're much of a man by being tall, rich, or sporty, the right-wing manosphere offers a simple solution: violence as the easiest, cheapest way to declare one's manhood.
Dude, I'd have sucked her, and I would have just decked her. Dude, I would have broke this fucking face.
Unlike feminism that can be really vague, like work on yourself, unlearn the patriarchy, stop being toxic, the manosphere gives a very clear path forward by doubling down on masculinity.
Can you get a job or a career? Can you educate yourself? Can you regulate the draw of temptation, drug and alcohol use in particular, sexual temptation as well?
Adhering to dominant gender norms is made out to be subversive, alternative, anti-status quo. So lonely and desperate men are made to feel part of something, a movement, a community, a struggle.
There's an attack on masculinity that you guys, you know, if you're on this side of the internet, you're seeing it, but there's been an attack on masculinity for the better part of the past 20 to 30 years.
They also give a very clear enemy, women or feminists or the elite. It's much easier to feel rage towards a specific group than something as vague and confusing as the patriarchy or economy.
Like, just meeting you for the first time, like, yeah, that guy hates women. And I get it. I hate women too, bro. Like, it builds up. It's not really your fault.
This is why I believe men's pain is one of the most powerful and destructive political weapons today. It can easily be exploited by right-wing groups to further fascism, racism, imperialism, war, and the oppression of women. In fact, I would argue that men's pain is one of the root causes of the world's longest list of atrocities, from colonialism to racism, all of which intersects with white male fears of non-white bodies and penises, gender-based violence, which has strong links to men's sense of powerlessness and emasculation. The need to regain power and control has contributed to the so-called raping of the earth. And men's insecurities is a cause of the arms race to regain the ultimate cock power.
Whether it's homicidal violence or suicidal violence, people resort to such desperate behavior only when they are feeling shamed and humiliated, or feel they would be if they didn't prove that they were real men.
If you're told from day one, don't let nobody disrespect you, and this is the way you handle it as a man, respect is linked to violence.
That's not to excuse or rationalize this behavior or to blame women or feminists for men's violence, but as the playwright Bertolt Brecht wrote,
"No man is born a butcher."
When men inflict violence, either systemic or interpersonal, they are usually projecting their inner wounding outwards. And of course, women and non-binary people are in pain too, but we're usually taught to deal with our wounds very differently. As I spoke about in my last video, me and my best friend both experienced CSA as children, but whilst I had a support network, skills for dealing with my emotions, and feminism to turn to, my friend as a boy's only recourse for dealing with his pain was to push that hatred and venom onto others, transforming him from the sweetest, kindest boy at 5 years old to a racist, homophobic, sexist, just before his death at 16. In other words, far from being crazy, very often warmongers, mass shooters, murderers, and rapists are simply overconformists to gendered expectations. So patriarchy hurts men on a personal, intimate level, but also in a collective sense, in that patriarchy is a civilizational death drive. How we choose to respond to the pain of men may well determine the fate of humanity. When I think back to that day at 9 years old, the juxtaposition between the deeply loving, tender act with the cat and the violent finality of his death highlights to me the often unseen pain many men carry within. No matter how outwardly peaceful, content, and present someone might seem, we never really know what's going on underneath. The complex inner world where profound love and crippling despair can coexist. And it's a poignant reminder to me that many men have it all without ever having the things they truly need most. So the question is, what can we do about it? Part of the power of all systems of oppression is in their capacity to allow for superficial change, whilst the broader structures remain intact. That being said, there's no blueprint for getting rid of patriarchy, no priority list of issues to focus on. We need radical socio-economic, political, and cultural change, and the arbitrary social constructions of masculinity and femininity need to be eradicated. We need to each find what our gifts, interests, and passions are orientated towards and become what Bell Hooks called
comrades in struggle.
But macro-level change is also not enough. Many men know feminism in theory, but not in practice, are committed to structural change, but dickheads in their personal lives, feminists in the streets, patriarchs in the sheets. In other words, patriarchy has really gotten under our skin. Unless we address the patriarch that lives within, these external changes will only ever be superficial, temporary solutions. To really root out the patriarchy that lives within requires addressing the fundamental trauma of our conditioning under patriarchy. Underneath the most patriarchal, oppressive beings, there's usually a wounded child crying for help. Even the most heinous parts of ourselves are protection mechanisms that emerged as a strategy of survival. Listening to them and loving them helps them to heal and transform. I wish just one person had sat with this man at 28 years old and invited him with love, compassion, and accountability to self-investigate. I'm curious in what ways patriarchy is living within me. How did it get there? Where did it come from? In what ways did internalizing patriarchy emerge as a strategy of survival? What wounding am I avoiding? How might I be able to heal this pain? Can I get connected to my internal guidance system outside of the gendered role I'm supposed to perform? How can I unlock the repressed parts of myself, the emotionality, vulnerability, self-compassion? What is the relationship between my own pain and the pain I am inflicting outwards? How can I get to the most authentic, liberated version of myself? Just as 200 years ago, psychology didn't exist, and these days a basic level of trauma consciousness is for many of us just a part of our everyday experience, in the same way, I want the work I do in this world to be part of a movement where we incorporate into common usage ways of making sense of systems of oppression and how they live within us. Recognizing this wounding is often a simpler process than finding and sustaining a practice of healing. So I'd love to be part of communities where we can say, we are flanking you, we have got you, we are attending to your healing, offering a love that can shelter each other's wounded spirits. One place you can do that is on our Discord. You can access by becoming a patron, where we created channels and bi-weekly community calls to facilitate these discussions. The next one will be about questions I posed in this video. Men often fear that relinquishing the patriarchy will worsen their lives, yet the opposite is true. Eradicating all vestiges of patriarchy will usher in a new humanity, a humanity where the richness of a man's inner world has a place to be embraced and celebrated, instead of being stifled and confined to a few brief moments with a cat. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I would love so much to hear what is your experience and relationship to the patriarchy and anything that has come up for you whilst watching this video. I'd really appreciate if you could consider becoming a patron to help me to continue to make these videos. As I said, on Patreon we have bi-weekly Discord calls and a book club, and I make monthly Patron-only videos. Thank you so much to my current patrons for helping to make these videos possible. Thank you so much to Opt Out and Jane for editing this video. And if you like this video, you may also like my video on why BreadTube has a patriarchy problem. Thank you very much. Bye!